I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and I've been trying to get him on the show for a little bit now because there's a lot going on in the People's House in Washington, D.C. But because there's been a lot going on in the People's House in Washington, D.C., he's been a tough book. But joining me now is Congressman Kelly Armstrong and, of course, my co-host Ben Hansen. And I think it's pretty obvious what we want to talk about. Kelly, I don't know what you want to call it, theatrics, an imbroglio. I don't know what word describes it, but that was quite the spectacle on the floor of the United States House. And I will preface this by saying this. I do agree that we have got to get back to actually having debates about policy and about spending on the floor of the People's House. I watch C-SPAN. I see how empty the chamber is a lot of the time. That's problematic. I did like the idea that we're going to have a debate. I'm not sure I liked the motivations of that particular debate. So I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but you just lived through it.
Yeah, I lived through it. And, I think one of the things, and I've cautious, we talk about the Freedom Caucus and all of that. First of all, half of the Freedom Caucus voted for Kevin McCarthy on every ballot. Of the 20 people that were dissenting, there are, I think there's, essentially two different camps. And one were people who really wanted to ensure that the rules were to what you had just did in your intro, Rob. The reason I know this is because since I was on Judiciary and Oversight and served with a lot of those members for 2 years in a pretty high-stress environment, and thanks for being so understanding in, hey, we can do this here, and I'm sorry, I got to go run to a meeting. But part of that is because we were trying to negotiate this out in good faith, and I wish it would have happened before January 3rd, but I think the end product is actually really good, and I think it's the only chance we have of governing in a small majority.
To that point, Congressman Armstrong, a lot has been made about the concessions that Kevin McCarthy made in order to ensure his speakership. Some would say somewhat not successful, but eventually he is now the Speaker of the House. Can you speak to which of those concessions he made you're for and against, kind of educate people on what they were?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's important, the only rule change we had from our original rules package, our official rules package that got accepted on the House floor, was on the motion to vacate. And that went down to one person. And it's important to remember that, well, two things. One's practical, one's historical. Historically, it's always been one person, one member vote motion to vacate. It had been that way for essentially 200 years until Speaker Pelosi changed it 4 years ago. And so it's going back to the original Jeffersonian model of motion to vacate. The practical effect of that, Ben, is it doesn't really matter. We have a four vote margin right now. 4 people can do a discharge petition to remove the chair of the House. And so whether it's 5 or 1 or 4 or 30, the practical effect on how we actually do procedure on the House floor doesn't matter. 4 people file a discharge petition and all the Democrats sign it. We're voting on it. So that's that part. The other side of it was, a commitment to bring certain bills to the floor through regular order, which I think is really important. And then something that I've advocated for anyway is to get a broader representation of the conference as a whole on all of the different committees. Traditionally, Freedom Caucus members have been on judiciary and oversight, and less so on appropriations, less so on ways and means, less so on those types of committees. I'm on steering, which is how we help populate the committees. It's the committee that populates the committees. First time I ever spoke up in steering was to get Chip Roy on judiciary after serving with him on oversight. The second time I spoke up was to get Thomas Massey on judiciary for two reasons. One, because I served with him on oversight. And two, there's actually competing views on patent law in the Republican conference. And him and Darrell Issa are the two smartest people I've ever met on patent law, but they have very big disagreements. And I thought it was important that we had both viewpoints on judiciary.
Do you feel like, there's a lot been made about this Congress's ability, this House, this Republican majority, slim as it is, its ability to govern. And I agree with you. I think historically you're right. It's always been where one person could move, I guess, to get rid of the speaker. But I think a lot of times, those sort of tools of democracy, they work as long as everybody's using them in good faith, right? If somebody starts using them in bad faith, they can really gum up the works. I know you had some words where you were talking about, in the moment, this isn't a good look and things like that.
No, it wasn't a good look. I'll say that now. Like I said, you can love all the concessions. I think I will say this after being here, now a week afterwards, I think this was all coming to a head. I think there's 12 years of history with the Freedom Caucus that from when they started till now, that once President Trump won and then 4 years in the minority, I think we had this false sense that this friction wasn't going to end up coming to a head. I think it was always coming to a head. And I'm glad we did it before the speaker vote as opposed to a month after. We're all going to have to talk to each other a lot more. One of the big things that I would say the institutional Republicans on my side of the aisle are concerned about is putting members of the Freedom Caucus on the Rules Committee. Well, I'd rather have the fight in the Rules Committee than have a rule taken down with 5 votes on the floor of the House. Either you bring them in at the beginning of the conversation or you have a fight at the end of the conversation. Good faith, bad faith. I will tell you, I've told my friends that we're on the other side of this. Okay, we're bringing everybody to the table. Now we all have a responsibility to govern. I think the big fundamental difference is 50% of the country and a Democratic-controlled Senate don't necessarily agree with that. And eventually we're going to have to, raise the debt ceiling. We're going to have to fund the government. Those things we have to do. And so the question will be, there's always a reason to get to know on that. But if we go in there and we negotiate, because we do control one half of Article 1 of the Article 1 branch of government, and we get the best concessions we can get in divided government, the question will be, will that be enough? And I don't know that answer.
And I guess that was getting to the point of my question. That was, how do you govern? And again, I think your point about everybody needing to talk to each other a lot more, however you might feel about some people who are very prone to grandstanding. I would say Representative Matt Gaetz is an example on the right. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may be an example of that on the left. Whatever you may think of them, they were elected by their constituencies. They're in Congress legitimately. You have to work with them, right? You have to deal with them. How can this House advance a conservative agenda when some people there may not be motivated, maybe more motivated by getting booked on Fox News?
Well, and I think there's 3 tranches right now, right? There's policy bills, which any good conservative policy bill coming out of the House has a very difficult time even getting a hearing in the Senate. Even if it would get a hearing in the Senate, it's not going to get 60 votes under Democratic control. And the likelihood of President Biden signing it are not great. Then you have spending bills, which I think we have said we also have 200 years of history of the House getting rolled by the Senate on spending bills. Then I'm not sure a 3-vote Republican majority is going to fully be able to turn back the tide of history and just the different makeup and nature of the different chambers. And then you have oversight. And those are the 3 tranches we have. The reason the policy bills are so important is because even if you can't get that whole bill to become law or even get a hearing in the Senate if you have some unity. I'll use border security as a perfect example, because I think the House Republicans are all fairly unified on what the things we need to do with border security. But you might not get a hearing on that bill in the Senate. That's fine. But you might have 2 or 3 policy things that you are like, listen, if you want to pass this appropriations bill and have it become law, we want 2 riders that are associated with border security, those types of things. So it's still important to do the policy bills and not just for messaging. And then the other side is oversight, which is the one thing the House does better than the Senate, because in the House the minority party doesn't have a lot of rights when it comes to hearings.
It's a question you get asked a lot, Congressman, but I got to ask it too.
Yeah.
You did just reference that you would eventually raise I believe you said you'd raise the debt ceiling. Do you think you'd be voting in favor of that when it comes up? Do you think the majority of the Republican caucus will? Do you think the House will pass that?
So I'm on the Republican Study Committee, which is the largest conference within our caucus. And we sent a letter last year under Democratic leadership opposing a clean debt limit increase. And I was the guy in the meeting that said, that's great. It's easy to vote no in the minority. Ben, we know those things. I said, I want some language in here to our leadership. This is a year and a half ago, right? Or wherever it was. I want some language in this letter that lets our leadership know they're going to have a hard time getting a clean debt limit increase through a Republican-controlled House without some spending concessions. And I think we can do that. I think Speaker McCarthy talked to President Biden yesterday, let him know that. He's been talking to Democratic leadership. I will vote for a debt limit increase, provided there are some spending reforms engaged in it.
I was reading an article recently that was really interesting that was trying to talk about, because a lot of what we saw on the floor a week ago or so was driven by divides within Republicanism. And somebody was they were writing about their argument was essentially that Republicans are struggling to find what they stand for again, and you have sort of people who are still maybe sort of that Reagan aligned coalition about limiting government and limiting spending, and then people who are just kind of for opposing whatever Democrats are for. Do you believe in that? I mean, what philosophically, like it does to me feel like this is a Republican Party that is trying to figure post-Trump, or mostly post-Trump, or however you want to say, that's a whole other show, trying to figure out what it stands for again. Do you see that? Do you perceive that?
So I think probably the most unique shift in Republican politics, I think there's 2 of them. One, we are definitely becoming more populist. You and I have talked about this. This is no longer the party of big business, large international corporations. This is more becoming.
Let me, as an anti-populist, let me interject and say, your choices are not populism or big international.
I did not say populism. I said we're becoming more populist, which I think is a good thing. Okay. I agree with you and I think we're trying to find our footing in that place, because there are guys like me who like the fact that we're moving towards, the Duluth area used to be a reliably blue district. It's now a reliably red district.
I was just, I didn't want to be like, I am not a populist.
I am not either, but I like the fact that we're getting more.
I can also be skeptical of Google.
We have changed, and it has functionally changed. And I think there's a lot of trying to find your footing in that space. And the other answer, which I think I'm actually, and Ben, this is the first time I've been on with you, but I've done this with Rob now for 4 years. I'm glad a lot of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle have started caring about $32 trillion in debt. Indeed. I never voted for a spending bill under President Trump either for my first 2 years here. This is something that I actually ran on. I continue to talk about, even when it wasn't always popular on the Republican side. I got called a rhino for not sending $2,500 checks to people, whether they needed them or not. So I think we're doing that. And then I think there's another thing. I think 2 years of COVID and not being present. And I mean, we have just about half of the Republican conference has never served in the majority. Both this freshman class and the last freshman class have never seen regular order on the floor of the House. You have traditional fights between rank and file members and previous leaders of the Republican Party. And then you have some of these ideological things. And I think it all came to a head in the bright lights of C-SPAN last week. I actually made a joke to a reporter. I said, they were walking out and I had been done. It was over. Kevin McCarthy had got elected. And I said, this was our plan all along. We looked and scoured the Nielsen ratings, and we figured out that the one time where C-SPAN's the number one rated cable news channel is 1:45 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So that's how we decided when to pass the gavel.
But by the way, this is completely up. How do we get it so C-SPAN can keep doing what they were doing with the cameras? I think a lot of people don't know this. One of the reasons why C-SPAN was able to move the cameras around and C-SPAN looked different than it normally does is normally when Congress is in normal session and rules are in place and everything, they can only point the camera at certain places at certain times. That's in the rules. How do we free C-SPAN up to do that? I thought that was so great, and it was so illuminating what we were able to see.
So I would, Speaker McCarthy, we already have more camera access now. Right now, it's going to be a little better. I will hesitate to that. I don't like, they have these huge, really bright lights up top, which if they make us look better, so be it. We're all in politics. I don't like the cameras behind us, particularly if we're going to be spending more time on the floor.
Yeah.
Which I think because the zoom cameras onto people's phones and the gotcha moments of politics, if you're dealing that stuff, but
you don't want C-SPAN reading your text to your wife while you're on the floor.
Yeah, if you're late for a meeting, or you guys both know me. I have some gallows humor sometime that I don't need that front and center. But I will tell you, I think a lot of people got a crash course in civics lessons last week, and I thought it was good for democracy. I have people texting me that have never watched any of this stuff before, saying, "Hey, you missed your vote."
I hear what you're saying, but I said this to a Representative Matt Ruby yesterday. I think he created a video about a bill he was watching. You serve in the state legislature. Now you're in Congress. People feel separated, like there's a curtain from them and the government. And unfortunately, as cliche as it is, the medium's the messenger. And when you get them in there and more involved, I understand what you're talking about speculation with reading the phone, gotcha crap. Yeah. But getting them more involved and getting them into that narrative, I think it just increases participation. I think it's really a good thing.
I would support more of it. I just think that if you do it, the way, if you've ever been in the House chamber, it's a complete circle. I think there's still a way to do it. And, if you're running 40 minutes late on the House floor and you're trying to reschedule what's going on in your office or trying to rebook a flight, or you're really frustrated about it for a very personal reason, that unfortunately the other side to that, in which we've all been a part of, Ben, you and I know really good legislators in North Dakota who nobody would ever accuse of being lazy a day in their life, having pictures of their phone playing solitaire. And that's just the lowest common denominator to how we do that. So I hope we do it. Speaker McCarthy's already got more of them in there, which I think is good. The lights are really bright. We'll have to figure that out, but we'll go from there. I thought it was great. I really did. I enjoyed it.
You're just going to have to start applying more makeup, Kelly. I did want to ask you something. You speak a lot about the criminal justice reform bills that you worked on, bipartisan ones, and some of the the sentencing reform bills. Yep. That's a good example of something that has picked up nationally. I want to give you an opportunity. So you're in the new majority. You must have things you've been wishing for. What are the top 3 non-headline, haven't gotten any coverage generation things that you want to talk about like that would be more like specific to like North Dakota?
So I'll tell you, because I think these all have bipartisan support, and some of it's frustrating. We have an online notary bill. Not getting a lot of tweets sent out about an online notary bill. But as people who live in rural areas and deal with blizzards and deal with a lot of different things, we do everything else online. We should be able to do this online. And we got it through the House last year, couldn't get it in. I have a couple bills. One is on exculpatory evidence and one is on acquitted conduct. Work actually very closely with Senator Durbin's office, of all places. I would have liked to have got the Equal Act, which was a crack parity and sentencing bill, across the finish line. I think that'll be a tougher lift. We got half the Republicans on our side to vote on it.
I apologize. I thought that was done. Clearly it's not.
We got it through the House. We did not get it through the Senate.
What?
And I think it will be, I could still get a lot of Republicans to support it. I don't know if we could get a lot of Republicans to move it. That's the difference between having a day. Sometimes it's easier to move stuff in a majority because you'll vote for it, but it's not just a priority. I mean, to be honest, there's not a lot of Republican members of Congress that have a ton of crack in their districts, right? So it's
there's a quarter of the day, but I understand what you're saying, and you have to get it in their district. Yeah, you have to make it relevant to their district.
I have a Section 230 tech bill on products liability that I think gives us a real opportunity to start maybe getting a bipartisan foot in the door and start talking about some of these protections that big tech has that they shouldn't have without bringing it into the misinformation or censorship conversation. It's a really good bill on its own, but I'm hopeful we can move it because it's also a good bill to start the bigger, larger, further conversation. As in the Microsofts, Amazon, Googles of the world are patenting everything to death and not allowing competition to come into the door? Is that what you're speaking to? No, more so if you look at how, like if you buy a drill and it blows up and it's a DeWalt drill, you can sue Home Depot, you can sue for products liability, or you could sue DeWalt, but you can't sue UPS for delivering it. Or the post office, right? It's not the post office's problem that they delivered you the drill. But so many of these tech companies are so vertically integrated and their business is data. Like once 3 of them blow up, Amazon knows they've blown up. So they're not the post office in the same way, even though they run the entire food chain. So I think there's some real issues there that we can work on, but it's a good bill and it's appropriate bill, but it's also a good way to hopefully start a bigger conversation on what this looks like moving forward.
I always like Section 230 stuff as somebody who works in the news media, and I've worked on both sides. Like I ran my own independent blog. Now I work for a traditional media agency, and stuff like that's always been very interesting. You know, it's hard to, you talk about like liability, a lot of the tech companies are exempted from what their users are putting on there. So if somebody libels you or does something illegal on your service, you're not necessarily culpable for that. But it runs into a problem where, Twitter, I mean, a lot of times they're hosting things. They know these people are libeling people. They know that they're putting up bad information, but there's no accountability for it. There's accountability for the forum. If we publish something that's libelous, we can get sued for it. And whether we win that lawsuit or not, it's going to cost us big legal fees. I can tell you that makes us very, very, very careful about what we publish. I don't see that caution when you talk about being vertically integrated. I'm sorry, Facebook, Google, Twitter, what have you, they're publishers in a lot of ways, and we've got to find a way to bring that accountability, I think.
Yeah, and I think the other answer to some of that is and as we continue to do this, really becomes in the app space and the server space. A lot of the First Amendment arguments you have with tech, particularly private companies, is compelled speech is the First Amendment is the part of the First Amendment that really triggers a lot more than censorship and all of that. But you don't have that same worry on a Microsoft server or in the Google App Store or in the Apple App Store. Like nobody's not putting their app in Apple because Reddit has an app in Apple. So I think I think creating more competition in the marketplace, and it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I'll give you one that makes some sense. If you start holding people liable like YouTube or platforms like that for piracy, that's great. I mean, I could find a pirated copy of a movie on YouTube right now, and I can barely run an iPhone. So they don't not take it down because they don't not take it down because they can't. They don't take it down because we don't make them. The problem is that software and that scrubbing software and that tracking software is one, proprietary, and two, really, really expensive. So there are some unique spaces in tech that we have to continue to talk about. There's something very not unique about DC. In our quest to regulate big business, we have always hurt competition and hurt small business worse. So how we approach the real answer in this space is more competition in the marketplace. It's always been the answer. It always will be the answer. But we have to do it in a way that we don't, in our zeal to regulate big tech, we don't further entrench them in the marketplace. And we have a place to look at this. GDPR in Europe had a vested interest in this because with the exception of Spotify, they were all American companies. We're now 6 years into GDPR, and the big U.S. tech companies are further entrenched in Europe than they were when they started.
Congressman, with you entering into the majority, are you changing committee assignments or are they staying the same?
I am on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I think I will. Well, I know I will still be on the Ethics Committee, and we will wait and see how they populate it. But I think there's at least a decent chance I might end up on this weaponization committee.
One thing, oversight. Everybody's been chomping at the bit. I know you've been talking about it. Republicans want to get to investigating, and on one hand, I don't want to diminish Congress's role on oversight. On the other hand, sometimes it starts to feel like some of this is you investigated us, so now we're going to investigate you, tit for tat. We're seeing a big blow up right now where there was a lot of controversy about Donald Trump and classified documents. Now we have President Biden, who sure looks, we're still getting information, but sure looks like he mishandled some classified documents as well. How is this Congress going to exercise oversight over some of this?
Well, I've been fighting with the federal government before it was cool. And I have, they call it the Church Committee, and it's based off of a committee set up in 1970. I like calling it the Church Committee because I want to know why HHS was tracking whether people were going to church during COVID. I have a huge problem. I can tell you the exact minute Dr. Fauci lost me. It was a CNN interview at about 3:30 in the afternoon when he said, "Why are we caring about civil liberties in a time like this?" He said that on TV. That's not a direct quote, but that's essentially exactly what he said. I think we know for a fact that the federal government is collecting all kinds of metadata on people without warrants. We know that under the FISA as it's currently authorized, that they do that without warrants on U.S. citizens. These are all things I care deeply about. And if it gets tied up into being political retribution, so be it, because I'm gonna pull every one of those threads until I get an answer. I just am. I've written 500 briefs on the Fourth Amendment in my entire life. The first time I think I got noticed on this, I took after a Republican witness on the Oversight Committee on facial recognition. I was the first Republican on our side to go after Director Wray after Trump appointed him. I'm not particularly interested. There's going to be a lot of politics around it. I want to know why the FBI, who had Hunter Biden's laptop for a year, was still saying it's misinformation when they knew it wasn't, why they were coordinating with big tech to censor. All of these things were happening. My biggest thing with these documents right now, because I've been very, very busy in the last 10 days and I'll have plenty of time to get into this, is why they knew about it a month before the election and it didn't come out. That seems to be a pattern, particularly on one side of the aisle. And I am not accusing them of coordination. I am suspicious that there has been some. And I think we have a very good opportunity, if we do this well and do this correctly, to get some real answers. I'm not interested in the more salacious parts of this. I'm interested in
all that to me. And again, that's what Congress is supposed to do. That is the oversight role that Congress is supposed to provide. Unfortunately, I think it gets overshadowed by the tit for tat stuff. Ben, go ahead.
It is part of what Congress is supposed to do. But Congressman, maybe I'm too romantic about the, past, constituency casework. It seems like all the oxygen in the room gets sucked up by these investigations entirely at a federal level, entirely about the executive branch. And you, as one member of a 435-member body, can't automatically fix that. But do you think there's a path for getting back to Congress people coming back and talking mainly about their district or being involved? And not to say you're not, it's just everything seems to be about who is the president right now, what scandals are around them that week. And after we get done talking about that, never mind ag and energy economy, regulations, industry.
I can tell you what the Ag Committee is going to work on.
Please do.
Bill. They're going to work on the Farm Bill. It's going to be a heavy lift. It's divided Congress. They're going to do it. We have one committee in Congress dedicated to oversight and one subcommittee on most committees dedicated to oversight. What everybody's talking about, I don't get a lot of questions from CNN, Fox News, or any of those guys about how many constituent service things did we do yesterday. That doesn't mean we're not doing them. I was just working. I actually just met with another member right before we did this, but right before that, I was dealing with a permitting issue in Northwest North Dakota. Remember, the average win rate of a Republican on oversight is R plus 26. The average win rate of a Democrat on oversight, I believe, is R plus 34.
Do you have those stats for the egg committee by any chance?
I don't.
It's much lower though, right? Yeah.
But right, you can't get an egg bill passed without bipartisan support. Which committee gets covered? I can't control. I have a pretty good idea which one's going to get covered, but I can't control that. But it is only one of the committees. T&I isn't going to be talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. Energy and Commerce is not going to be talking about classified documents. They're just not. We did a roundtable with Ag and Energy the other day. It was really substantive. Yeah. It was great. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes on in this place that isn't on TV, and we're not talking. Yeah. You know what's never going to come up in Energy and Commerce? George Santos. Like, it's just not.
No. Go up to a CNN camera, a Fox News camera, tell them that you saw one of the Kardashians in the egg committee room and just see if they run to it and see if they can't get them to accidentally film stuff.
So I have an old story about this. You both will appreciate this. So we're in the North Dakota State Senate and we're walking down, and I was upstairs at my desk having a cup of coffee, and Chairman of the Finance and Tax Committee, Dwight Cook, was up there, and him and I walked down to our committee room because we were going to meet. And all the cameras are setting up on the main floor, and the reporters are all buzzing. And Dwight had a big income tax bill in finance and tax at the time. And he's like kind of got a little bounce in his step, and he was super excited. And he's like, finally, they're starting to cover this. And I had to look him in the face, and I said, Max Schneider and I have a revenge porn bill in judiciary. That's what they're all here for.
Hey.
And he just put his hands in his pocket. He dropped his head. He shook his head, and he just walked into the finance and tax. So it's not just a CNN issue.
Kelly, do you remember? I originally wrote the revenge porn bill. Yeah. Mac took it from me. Fun times.
Also, by the way, it's law in North Dakota, and it was a good piece of law.
Yeah. As the representative of the news media, I would just like to point out that the problem doesn't begin with us. The problem begins with the public, who sometimes, unfortunately, cares about things more than others, and their priorities aren't great. But nobody likes to talk about that, because if you're
I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you.
There's a lot of upside down priorities.
Whoever is listening to this and is going to be involved in the blood sport that is the body politic right now needs. I want them to know that I can fight with one of these Democrats on whatever committee I'm on, where we're making news clips, and at least from my end, I'll go work with them on something that we agree on. I did it with Jamie Raskin in the middle of the Mueller investigation and impeachment, because him and I actually agree on civil asset forfeiture. And we would literally yell and scream at each other. We don't really yell and scream, but to that degree. And as soon as the hearing was over, I'd walk up to him and say, where are we at on civil asset forfeiture? And we'd stop and have a nice, reasonable conversation about it.
Well, I think you promised us 30 minutes, and we got them. So I think we got to stop it there. But Kelly, thanks so much for your time. Good luck.
Thanks, guys.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.